Hello and welcome everyone. I'm your host Stefan Burns, geologist, geophysicist, space weather guy, here to report you on some notable activity around Japan. We just yesterday had a magnitude 5.7 earthquake strike underneath Mount Fuji in Japan. And this caught my attention because of its proximity. We can measure the epicenter to the center of Mount Fuji. It's about 22 kilometers. But keep in mind that this is 51 kilometers down. So if you actually draw it out, it's really not that diagonal, right? It's just a little diagonal from the base of Mount Fuji. And this is Japan's tallest volcano and its largest volcano. It's not a mountain, just in general. It rises 3,776 meters above sea level. That's 12,389 feet. And it has had some serious eruptions in the past. So volcanoes have deep plumbing systems going down into the mantle, especially big ones. And so when you see an earthquake occur underneath a volcano and or close by, you start to pay attention. And especially with Mount Fuji, because the last big eruption of Mount Fuji was in 1707, and just a bit more than a month before it erupted violently, there was a magnitude 8.7 earthquake. So we can look at that here. We have the location of this earthquake in 1707, Hoei earthquake. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Magnitude 8.7 just off to the south and to the west. And then that was on the 28th of October, 1707. And then you started to have swarm activity begin in this area with Mount Fuji. Clearly got activated by the seismic waves passing through. Then there was another earthquake on the 15th of December. And then on the 16th of December, 1707, boom, you get Mount Fuji to erupt. And that continued all the way to the 1st of January, 1708. So there's clearly, we know just in general, geologically, there's a strong connection between earthquakes and volcanoes. A, volcanoes can generate earthquakes. B, earthquakes can trigger volcanoes. And we also have many historic examples of some of the largest eruptions that have ever occurred have been preceded by very large earthquakes. Now, case in point is the fact that this was the largest earthquake in Japan on record until 2011 with the magnitude 9.1 Great Tohoku earthquake. So that is pretty notable that we had the biggest earthquake in Japan, the most active place on the world seismically, in 300 years, just 15 years ago. Not that far ago, not that long ago, okay? And in fact, 2 days before this magnitude 5.7 here under Mount Fuji, there was a magnitude 7.2 up to the north. Now the USGS has this as a magnitude 6.9. The Japan Meteorological Agency, the JMA, they have this as a 7.2. I'm taking their magnitude measurement for it because they're the ones with the high density seismic network across Japan, whereas USGS doesn't have such high density around that area. So the Japanese measurement is more likely to be accurate. I trust the Japanese a bit more than the USGS as it relates to earthquake magnitudes. They say it's a 7.2. And in fact, if we look at our data here, we see that Japan's been having a huge amount of activity for the past 8 months. So again, we can go down here and see this 5.7. We also had a 5.8 on the same day, roughly the same depth just off to the east there. But that's kind of notable. But here is the main zone of activity for the past 8 months. And this 7.6 there, the Japanese have that as a 7.7. Here's a 7.4, this 6.9 being that 7.2 according to the Japanese. So multiple magnitude 7s and magnitude 6s, as you can see, in 2 distinct zones, but in general within this region here. Whereas the Great Tohoku earthquake was to the south, and then the Hoei earthquake was more down in this region right here. So as it relates to Mount Fuji, well, we have this history of Mount Fuji being activated by big earthquakes. We just saw a 5.7 strike just off the slopes and 51 kilometers down. And we're recent in time, not only to the Great Tohoku earthquake, which is bigger than what happened here in 1707, but also all these earthquakes up to the north. So think about how all that seismic energy is just battering Mount Fuji and the magma plumbing system that it has. And there also has been inflation uplift at Mount Fuji. Now keep in mind, during the summer, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people hike the slopes of Mount Fuji. There can even be lines and queues. So when it goes, it's going to go. Hopefully not when that happens, but it very well could do so. Now, an interesting thing to point out as it relates to Mount Fuji is that it had a very powerful eruption in 864 AD. The Jogan eruption, I believe is how you pronounce it. And in fact, that occurred as one of multiple eruptions from 800 to 1083 AD. So there's 12 eruptions, big ones, during that time frame. I saw that and I found that very, very interesting because, as some of you may know, we have these things called Miyake events, actually named after a Japanese researcher, Miyake, is their last name. And basically what they found was these huge increases in radioisotope levels in tree rings, carbon, beryllium, and others, indicative of these massive solar particle events. So basically huge plasma storms hit Earth, and there's this, from these, basically they call them super flares. We don't exactly know where triggering these Miyake events, but they're unlike anything that we've seen in recent history with the space weather that we've observed. They're bigger than Carrington events. Much bigger, 10 to 100 times bigger than a Carrington event. So there was a Miyake event that occurred in 774 AD. You'll notice that precedes this eruption period of 800 to 1083. There was another Miyake event that occurred in 993 AD, approximately. It's like 992 to 994. And you even have one, I believe it's 1052 AD, was another Miyake event. So interesting to point out that you have 12 huge eruptions from Mount Fuji, this huge period of activity, and then it went quiescent all the way to the 1500s when we had tons of solar activity during that time frame. And not just Carrington level, but like huge, huge solar activity. So there seems to be a pretty powerful connection between not only the Earth and the sun, but also the sun and earthquakes directly. And we see this solar cycle signature in volcanic data. So earthquakes, volcanoes, and the sun are all connected in ways that we're still exploring, but you look through the record, you look through the connections, and well, it just really constantly reaffirms that this connection exists. And as you get more data, it'll start to really become undeniable. The thing is that we've only been collecting this data for a few decades. So these sort of trends require not just a few decades, but really like probably at least 100 years to really be certain on. So thank you all so much for watching. I've been your host, Stefan Burns. Smash that thumbs up button, subscribe, and